much earlier. We understand that and you've had some difficulty. We're trying to resolve that behind the scenes. The technical support will continue to provide the support. And with Mr. Frank today and Promise, I'm sure can get all that resolved. Having said that, we have a time commitment. Our speakers are very busy individuals. So without much ado, I'll give you a quick high-level overview of what to expect. Today's workshop essentially is focused on oil and gas media professionals who are partners in the industry. The theme of the workshop is accessing quality information and data journalism for oil and gas professionals. Today, you'll be hearing from industry experts, including Mr. George Ogwatuba, Ms. Evelyn, and Mr. Tonya Kiyosho, a fellow of Nape. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag, but today's moderation will be done by one of you, Mr. Wole Famurewa, who is an anchor and producer, the former anchor and producer at the West Africa edition of CNBC Africa. It's my single honor to invite our president, Mr. Alex Tucker, to give his presidential message. Again, good morning, everybody. And over to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Amadou, for the opening remarks. On behalf of the Executive Committee of Nape and the entire membership, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this one-day workshop for oil and gas media practitioners. The theme of this workshop, assessing quality information and data journalism for oil and gas media professionals, is very significant and relevant, especially in the new normal, where the COVID-19 pandemic continues to cause us to adapt to new ways of working, living, and relating with each other, even family members. I'm elated to see we have participants drawn from the various media organizations in the electronic, print, and digital platforms. We are indeed grateful to you for honoring our invitation to attend this workshop. I would like to recognize our distinguished speakers who will be making useful contributions to this workshop. I thank you for taking time off your very busy schedules to come and contribute to this workshop. NAPE's rationale for hosting this workshop is to enrich the quality of the reportage of events in the oil and gas space by facilitating in-depth deliberate conversations to address and close the gaps and opportunities in interviews, messaging, reporting, and overall coverage of the oil and gas industry in Nigeria by media practitioners. The oil and gas industry is highly technical in its processes and operations. It is important that the reportage of events in the oil and gas space by oil and gas media practitioners, professionals, is delivered accurately, in context, and with the appropriate degree of details. Many oil and gas media professionals struggle to assess and accurately interpret oil and gas information. Data journalism beyond the visual and statistical representation it entails is an important resource for journalists and indeed oil and gas media professionals to ensure accurate representation of events, especially in a data-driven industry like the oil and gas industry. This workshop is NAPE's corporate social responsibility initiative to enable the growth of the oil and gas reporting competence by providing free masterclass training for oil and gas media professionals by world-class speakers on German teams. Nape will continue to partner with the press and other stakeholders in providing a platform for learning, nurturing best practices, evolving new solutions, and enhancing economic development. In closing, I must commend the workshop planning committee for their tireless efforts and diligence in putting this workshop together. With these remarks, I declare this workshop open and wish you all fruitful deliberations. Thank you for your kind attention. God bless the Nigerian Association of Petroleum Explorationists. God bless the oil and gas community. God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very, very much. That's the president's remark. He has already hit on the reason why we are doing this. This is not the first. This is the 5th edition of the media workshop. And we are very, very glad to be doing this. Historically, the one last year was aimed at sharing the reasons why reporting the oil and gas space is critical to ensuring that the competitiveness of Nigeria in the global oil and gas game is conceptually and appropriately captured. This year, our focus is a little different. And that's why it's very, very important we're calling the moderator, Mr. Wole Famurua, whose experience in both media, not just in Nigeria, but globally, and in the oil and gas space will be very, very invaluable in the conversations we're having today. It's my pleasure to call upon Mr. Wole Famurua, our moderator for today, to join us. So please, Mr. Wole Famurua, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. We can't see you yet. Okay. You've not started your video, sir.
I hope everyone can hear me now. My apologies for that brief.
Yes, we can hear you.
In transmission from this side. Thanks so much. And good morning to everyone, and the president of Nape and all attendees. We're moderating this session this morning, and I think as
please can you start your video, sir?
My apologies. I thought I was sharing my video. Okay, I hope you can hear and see me now.
Can hear you. We can't
all right.
See you.
Can't see me. Still can't see me.
Not yet.
Okay. What about, let me just try again to start and stop the video. All right, I hope you can see me now.
I'm still waiting for that. Wow.
Is the host that is.
We still can't see you.
Okay. 1 second. All right, what about now? Can you see and hear me now?
Yes.
Can you see and hear me now?
We can see you, but we can't hear you.
Okay. Can I perhaps
you can go ahead.
suggest?
Okay.
You can hear me?
No.
Can you hear me?
No.
Okay. While I try to resolve that,
Okay.
can I suggest that perhaps if you can hear me, you could just go ahead to introduce
Yeah, we can go ahead.
speaker and hope, so we can save time. I will try and resolve this connection issues and join in ASAP.
Okay. All right. I will go ahead with the program then while you try to resolve that.
I think he's a host that has taken him off the video.
No, he has. I think he's got network issues, which I'm sure he can resolve now. All right, but again, I guess that's typical of events like this. So our agenda is actually packed full, and I think we may as well move everybody through the agenda so we know what to expect for today. So that's the agenda we are planning to share with you today. We've shared the welcome remarks, and the president has given his speech. The workshop essentially is broken into 3 sessions. Session 1 is focused on the exploration and production value chain, business and key stakeholders. This is where we dive into the actual business of the oil and gas industry and the very early part of it. We will be taking an industry leader, currently the Executive Director of Commercial and Strategy for Total Exploration and Production. I believe this will set the right foundation for the conversations we plan to walk through. The next session will be by Ms. Yvette Dimiri, Group Editor, Stairs Business, where she will be sharing with us specific tools, strategies, and how best to leverage data and digital journalism to help in your reporting. She will bring her experiences, which she has across the industry to bear. Finally, we will dive into session 3, which will be by a veteran in the oil and gas space and a veteran in the journalism space. This is a rare combination, but Mr. Toyi Akilusho has that privilege of having that mix of oil and gas and journalism. And this session will be focused on oil and gas reporting in the world of fake news. This is something you don't want to miss. After that, we'll have photo ops and then some wrap up by the moderator. So without much ado, let me invite the next speaker, or the first speaker to be exact, and of the first session, Mr. George Ugwanchuba, to the stage. Mr. George, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Okay, and we can hear you live and clear. All right. Okay, so Mr. George, let me know when you're ready.
I am ready.
We'll share. Okay, give me a second. Please, let's have Mr. George start by giving us a stop sharing. Okay. You can start with an introduction before we start to share your slides. So.
I should introduce myself?
So just a general overview before we
Okay. My name is George Ogwachba. I think you already mentioned that. Currently the Executive Director of Commercial and Strategy at Total E&P, Nigeria. And in my other life, I used to be an explorationist. And then I ventured into asset management and commercial matters right now are my forte. And I've spent some time in various locations in our headquarters in Paris, 2-year period, I was the vice president for new ventures in North America, and then came back to Lagos September last year, where I took up my current responsibility. I'm married and I have 4 children. Thank you. So I think I'll just go straight into the presentation. Thank you very much. Now, the subject I've been asked to present to us today is something for which each line is a master's, maybe even a PhD degree from the universities, but we have about 20 minutes to try to speak on this thing. So I will give you a very high overview. And then hopefully if there is any other areas for which you would like to have further clarification, we can discuss that during the Q&A. But what you see right now will be the content of this morning's presentation. We'll give a broad overview of the oil and gas in Nigeria, and then look at it from the E&P value chain. Then we look at the upstream. What is the upstream? Knowing that the oil and gas value chain cuts across several aspects, but our focus area will be the upstream. And then you hear different contracts in the Nigerian oil and gas space. What is the JV? What is deepwater? The PSCs? And then the revenue framework. Who gets what from each of these contracts, whether the JV or the PSC. And in the course of the presentation, maybe earlier on, I will speak on very shortly about the key industry players and stakeholders in the business we're involved in. And then we get into the Q&As. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. You know, the E&P in Nigeria basically remains a very important economic driver for the nation. It's the basis of more than 70% of Nigeria's foreign income earning, and the continued success and development and the operations of this sector is key to the Nigerian economy. I don't think we need to say too much. When the oil price goes up and production goes up, Nigerian economy responds to it. And when the price goes down, you see that the Nigerian economy also responds to that, especially when you consider that as a country, we are producing over 2 million barrels of oil a day and over 2 billion BCF, 2 billion standard cubic feet of gas per day, in addition to about 446,000 barrels, of installed refining capacity. Now, this is installed refining capacity. What actually is refined is another story, and I'm sure we are all following what's happening to the Nigerian refineries. Next slide, please. So, with the largest oil and gas reserves, clearly Nigeria is the leading producer in Africa and is ranked 6th in the world when it comes to LNG production and exports, especially when you consider that Nigeria recently signed the FID for the Train 7 of the Nigerian LNG. And although not without its challenges, there have been consistent growth in the domestic gas space, especially since the government put in place the domestic gas obligations on various operators in the industry. That said, we only have a fraction of Nigeria's gas capacity that is being produced, approximately less than 20% actually, of our vast gas potential is being produced. And of course, that is because of the various challenges linked to the facilities required for gas development and production. And of course, related to that will be the contractual arrangements put in place for the end users of the gas that is so produced. And for the oil, we see a gradual shift over the last couple of years. You see that since 1993, when the PSCs were signed, we see a gradual move from the conventional JVs into the PSCs, the production sharing contracts. And this is where we have gone deep water. And gradually we see that the production from Nigeria's deep water is currently accounting for about 35% of Nigeria's oil and gas production. And we see a gradual reduction in the production in the joint ventures or conventional onshores and offshore facilities. Why is this so? Does it mean that we do not have more resources there? Definitely not. But these are linked to the fact that the oil and gas industry is driven by different investors who are focusing on the benefits for their individual companies, and also based on the various initiatives that the government is putting on the table to encourage exploration or lack of it. Next slide, please. So we see that in the value chain of the oil and gas space, it cuts across three key areas. There is the upstream, there is the midstream, and then there is the downstream. The upstream involves, and this is our area of focus, the upstream involves the exploration, the development, and the production of hydrocarbons. And then just for completeness, the midstream, as you can see on the slide, refers to the pipeline, the LNG, the transportation and tolling activities, whereas the downstream activities cover the refining, the petrochemicals, the distribution and retailing activities. But our focus today is on the E&P, the exploration and production, which is the upstream component. But each scope here plays an important role, but in terms of what touches the end users in the country today, we see that the downstream aspect, although it's not significant in terms of cost when you compare it to the upstream and the downstream, remains the crucial aspect that the Nigerian population actually touches. And this is when they go to buy their petrol at the petrol stations or gas for cooking and all of that. But everything that happens upstream leads to what you see in the downstream. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, in terms of key industry stakeholders and players, there are many players here. And clearly, the resource holders, you start that from the government who own the resources before any contracts are signed. But at the government side of it, you have, especially in the current context we are in Nigeria, you see that from the government, National Assembly, the national oil companies, that's the NNPC, and all government parastatals. You have the DPR, you have the NCMB, you have non-oil and gas parastatals also who are also involved in the oil and gas space. You have NIMASA, and you have several others involved in the activity of the oil and gas. And as a result of this interplay of various government agencies, you see that the required administrative hurdles are clearly increased, because you need to go from one government office to another to get different and necessary approvals, depending on what the subject matter is. And then you also have the operators. Of course, for operators, we have the IOCs, the international oil companies. You also have the other IOCs, the independent oil and gas companies. These are the Nigerian companies. And then you have the marginal field operators. Now, marginal field, I'm sure you know, marginal field basically refers to oil and gas fields that have been produced, operated by larger operators whose resources have come down. And because of the size, the oil and gas, the bigger companies say, okay, the overhead required for the management of these assets is way too high for them to manage it. So it is given out to smaller operators who come in and manage this. But the process of marginal field allocation is managed by the DPR. So we also have the service companies, and these are contracting companies that provide services to the E&Ps. And here you have the drillers, you have the exploration companies for seismic data acquisition processing, and you also have contracting companies for the interpretation of the seismic data. And you do have engineering and construction and other general contractors who are involved in the business we are involved in. You know, Total as a key player in the industry, we are committed to the growth of oil and gas as a major economic driver, and we are open to collaboration with the federal government of Nigeria and other key stakeholders towards the continued development of oil and gas in Nigeria. And this is testified by the fact that we are one IOC that has continued to invest in the exploration and development of our resources. We've gone from Akpo to Usan, and now we just recently concluded and put on stream the Egina field. Next slide, please. Now, before I go to the next slide, if you go back, please, let me say a quick comment. Even though you do have those key players in the oil and gas industry, we also do have the host communities, and the host communities play an important role in the business we do, because the industry has corporate social responsibility, not just to themselves and their staff, but also to the government and to the host communities involved in the activities we are involved in. We participate in various MOUs to ensure that a portion of what we do, the benefit of it goes to the host committees for the different activities we're involved in. Now, this next slide gives us a typical life and the different stages of a block. And I'll try to summarize it. Essentially, the process starts with the negotiation for a block, and in the context of Nigeria, you go for bid rounds. Bid rounds with respect to big new contracts, and you bid, and in the course of the bidding, you need to negotiate the type of contract that the government is putting on the table. Is it a PSC, a production sharing contract, a production sharing agreement, or is it a joint venture? All of these are defined by the government at the time you are negotiating for the block, and all of these are brought into play when the bids are being put together by the various companies. Now, the company that wins, basically, you have the option to either go immediately to a partial sale of some of your equity, or you decide that you want to go straight to have your seismic data acquisition. Whether you go straight to data acquisition, processing and interpretation, or you do a partial sale immediately, bottom line is because of the risks involved in oil and gas exploration, most companies would like to share those risks. And each company has a limitation in terms of the exploration budget that they have. So the exploration risk is shared. You need to know that by the time you go through to drilling and exploration, well, if you take the deep water, for instance, by the time you have done your data acquisition and you pay your bonus to the government, you acquire the data, you process the data, you interpret the data, and you drill a well. If you drill that first well and that first well is dry, or you do not make a commercial discovery, all that money, in the case of the PSC, all that money is sunk. And to give you an idea, you actually, depend on the water depth of the well, of the prospect you drilled, you are looking at anything between $50 and $100 million that just sunk down the drain and is gone. If you do that, you'll see that the process goes from exploration, well appraisal, and straight into relinquishment of the block, because you do no longer have any prospect of interest to keep you going in the field. And that's not our preferred option. Our preferred option is for us to go into exploration and appraisal, make some significant discoveries, and then you continue into development. Once you get into development, project development and all of that, you now continue into your production. We would like to have a block for which this entire process is fully captured. And to give you an idea, from the very first day, from the beginning of this process to the very end of this process, even if you make a billion barrel discovery, before you can sell the first barrel to make the first dollar from your field, especially in the case of the PSCs, and in the case also with the JVs, you would have had to spend everything that is required to put the field in production. And we are discussing anything for the PSCs, anything from $5–6 billion to $15 billion to be spent up front before you begin to make any, have any income. Same thing applies for the JV. So it's a demanding process financially speaking. And because of the risk associated with exploration, most companies are quite cautious. They hedge their risks as they get into the exploration. But of course, when you do get it right, the benefits are long incoming. Next slide, please. Now, in the next slide, you will see typically, and I won't bother going into the details of this, but I have put all of this here so that for you, you have an indication of what it's all about when we get into seismic data acquisition, processing, and interpretation. Now, for the geologists and the geophysicists, they are looking for ways to try to understand, just by looking at the seismic data, what is happening in the earth. Do you have certain qualities, certain factors that need to come together for the generation and the trapping of oil or gas? Now, the ingredients that are captured there are just for your information. The source rock basically refers to what generates, what cooks the oil, from where the oil is generated. The heat and the pressure refer to the pressure and the heat that are applied to that source rock that will cause the liquid contained in the elements to be extracted. That the migration involves, once the oil is extracted from that source rock, it begins to move away from that source rock until it migrates into where it can be stored. And that storage is called a reservoir rock. And usually these are sands in the case of Nigeria. In other parts of the world, you can get into carbonates, and because then you're looking into cracks, fractures within the carbonates. But in the case of Nigeria, looking at porous sandstones. And then you do have the seal to be sure that once the oil gets into the reservoir, you have something protecting it from escaping. And finally, you need a structure, which is basically like a storage room, the housing for the oil. So the geologists and the geophysicists are looking for all of these parameters when they go searching for oil and gas. If you go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, just to have it in context, at the time the geologists and the geophysicists get into seismic data acquisition, on the right-hand side of the screen, you see a seismic vessel that's acquiring data. What you see behind the vessel refers to the streamers and the cables for the receivers. And I won't get into the details of the processing itself, but basically the vessel releases a charge that sends seismic signal and that are reflected and received by the receivers being towed behind the vessel. But for the geologists, for the geophysicists, if you look at the picture on the left, all they probably see is the little stump, bottom left. All they see is that little stump, but they need to be creative. You need to be imaginative. You need to create a picture that, yes, this is what I'm seeing, but it's suggestive of something bigger. So you go with your model. You create a model based on what you see, based on what you know, and that model is what drives you into defining a prospect and determining what the size of this prospect is. And also you do an evaluation of the risk to assess whether it's worth continuing or not. Because as we mentioned earlier on, there is a lot of risk involved in oil and gas, and you want to be sure that you do not want to have $100 million washed down the drain. And this is the reason, in order to hedge the risk, to balance the risk by the operators, you get into partnership with other industry players for the exploration and development of the assets. If you go to the next slide, please. So just very quickly, again, I won't go into all the details, but the process for the deep water development, you do have the project, what we call project, development project, where you are essentially putting in place every facility that is required for you to be able to produce that field that you have discovered. Keep in mind that from the date of, especially for deep water operations, from the date you make that discovery to the date you complete the development and produce the first barrel that is shipped and sold, you are discussing almost $15 billion, or you are discussing 8 to 10 years from the beginning up through to this time. So when you have made that discovery and you need to get into development, the development actually captures different phases of the work that is done. There is a drilling platform, there is a production platform where your production systems are pulled together, and then there is the FPSO, which basically is your storage and the accommodation space for those who are working offshore. Now, these are the things you see on the surface, but in the subsea systems, you have all the connectors where production from all the wells, because for each field, for instance, you are looking 20, 30, 40, 50 wells that are being drilled in order to optimize the production from each of these fields. So you need to have a subsea system that's able to pull all of these wells together. If you may, on the surface, if you're looking at onshore operations, these would normally be your surface pipelines and production terminals. But in the case of the deep water, it's different. Everything is subsea, and the required technology is needed to ensure that these things are done safely and in such a way that in the life of the field, everything is maintained secure. Next slide, please. How am I doing with time? Please signal me, moderator.
Yes, thank you very much, George. It would be great if you could wrap up the presentation in another 5 minutes or so we can take questions.
All right, I just have 2 more slides. So I'll go very quickly through this slide. Now, this slide essentially looks at key differences between the conventional JV, the joint ventures, especially in the ones we have with the government, where the government is a 60% or 55% holder, and the other players. Initially, the JV partners and operators used to be the IOCs, but recently we've seen a lot of divestment by the operators, for which independents have come into play. So the JV is no longer between NNPC and IOCs, but between NNPC, IOCs, and NNPC and independent players. And on the costs and benefits, you see the chart below. On the blue refers to your CAPEX, the amount of money that is spent, and on the yellow line refers to the revenue, when your revenue begins to come. And you see that for the conventional onshores and offshores, because of the fact that we have matured in these areas, the time space to go from your development into your first oil is considerably reduced. And many of the fields have long production profiles. When you look at that and compare with the deep water requires a lot of capex at the beginning, like I mentioned, up to $15 billion. And you need almost 10 years in some cases to go from your exploration to your first oil before you begin to make any incomes. Now, the difference, a further difference in these two is in the sharing of the profit that comes from these operations. And as I mentioned, the NNPC keeps 55 to 60% of the equity in the JVs, but in the PSCs, they have zero risks. So all the risks are taken by the operators in the PSC. So in the event that they drill a negative well or a dry well, all that money is lost and the risk is taken 100% by the operators. But in the event that there is a success and there is development, then the government comes in and partakes in the sharing of the profit. And this is seen in the next slide. If you go to the next slide, please. So typically, if you assume a typical case where the government has, on the left-hand side, where the government has 60% equity and the JV party has a 40% equity. After costs have been taken out, because in the case of the JV, the government also partakes in the risk of exploration and also partake in the spending leading to the production of these assets. So the government shares 60% of that and also benefits 60% of what comes in. So once the costs are removed, everything that is left, the government takes 60% of the share, and then the operator or the JV party takes 40%. But of the 40%, taxes and royalties are applied to that 40%. And that brings you to about another 36%. Am I right? 34%. Now, but there are other taxes and levies that are being paid by the industry to different government agencies. And as you know, the NCDMB, you pay 1%, the education fund, you pay 2%. So you add all of this together, the net effect is that the government when you put all of this together in the JV, government takes approximately 95%, while the oil and gas companies involved in the JV go away with about 5%. After the costs have been taken care of. In the PSC is slightly different because the companies bear the entire risk, and once the oil comes out, the government says you need, first of all, especially with the passage of the new Royalty Act that at the end of last year, you take out 10% plus the price component, which is for now, given the price range of the barrel, it brings you another 2 to 2.5%. So you take out your royalty oil, first of all, and then you remove your cost. Once the cost is removed, everything that's left, you need to pay the hydrocarbon tax and all the necessary duties involved. And then what is left as the profit oil is now shared between NNPC and the company that's operating it. So comparatively, you see that the net take by the government ranges between 75%, some say maybe 72%, and sometimes could go as high as 80%. But all of these are dependent on the type of PSC that is signed. Keep in mind that from 1993 to 2005, we have had different PSCs. They have the 1993 PSC, the 98 PSC, the 2000 PSC, and then the last bid round we had in Nigeria was in 2005, 2006, and that also came with its own PSCs. So in a nutshell, this is what the industry is all about, and I do hope I've been able to communicate some information to you with which you can do some work. Thank you very much. I'll be available now for any questions and answers.
Thank you very much, George. Very useful insight into how the industry is working. Sincere apologies earlier, I got cut off. As you know, sometimes technology is not our friend, but hopefully it's stable as we move forward now. All right, so as I did mention earlier, I did put that message in the chat field. If you do have questions or comments regarding the presentation you just heard, this is a good time to share those questions and comments. But maybe while we wait for others to do so, I just want to maybe throw some at you, George. The first point I wanted to hear from you about is about PSCs. You mentioned it is either JVs or PSCs typically, and I wanted to find out the structure of PSC contracts. How often are they reviewed, and what's the typical time frame? And maybe you can start with that, and maybe I'll shoot some other questions after.
All right. The PSCs have different life phases for it. If you sign the PSC with the government for a new block today, and usually it starts with the OPLs at the prospecting phase, that's the oil prospecting lease. Now you get the PSC as a prospecting lease, and you have, except of course it gets changed because of the PIB that's under discussion now, but as we have it today, you have a 10-year phase of exploration split into 5 years and 5 years. First exploration phase of 5 years, followed by a second exploration phase. And this requires you to have some minimum work obligations that are commitments that the operator gives to the government at the time this is being awarded. And usually it will involve seismic data acquisition and possibly the drilling of at least one exploration well. Either that, or you have a financial commitment, which is called like a bond that is put to mitigate against you not taking those minimum work obligations. Now, in the event that you make no discovery, or you make a discovery that is not significant, you can walk away from that block and the contract is closed. Now, if you do find something and you want to continue into developing it and producing it, you need to apply it to the government. And to apply to the government, you need to have demonstrated that you have drilled the well and that the well has been tested, the production has been tested and confirmed to produce at least 10,000 barrels of oil a day. And then typically different companies have different thresholds, but in the deep offshore, you are looking at something like from the 500 and above million barrels of reserves. Now, at the time that you want to get into this development, you now apply for a conversion of your license from a prospecting lease to a mining lease. Once you get into that, you now have another life. So your initial phase of your contract, the PSC, goes for 25 years, and then you do your mining lease itself goes, I think it goes 20 years, sometimes 25 years.
All right. So sorry to butt in. Sorry to butt in. So what you just described, the 20 years, 25 years. So are you suggesting that the terms are not subject to review over that period, or are there typically clauses to review, for example, the sharing formula in terms of how much the government gets and how much the operator gets?
If you look at because if you look at all the PSCs today, only the 93 PSCs are in production. All subsequent PSCs have not been in production for many different reasons. For some, they say the fiscal terms are not interesting, so companies are a bit cautious in getting into exploration activities. But if I focus on the 93 PSC, one of the requirements in there says when there's a price threshold. Keep in mind that at the time these contracts were put in place, the price was like what we saw earlier on in this year, where prices were really, really low. So there was a price factor that was put into it that if the price should get to a certain level, government had the option to call the operators for a negotiation of the sharing of the benefit.
All right. So all that is typically built in.
That's built in the PSC.
Start. So you can model your revenue moving forward depending on what the oil price is. Okay, thank you very much. I don't want to hold on to the mic so much, so to speak. So I want to now go to the audience. We have quite a few questions and we have just a few minutes to take them. So if you can respond very concisely, that would be much appreciated. So the first question is from Tajuddin Adigun. And he's asking, how will George compare the previous PSCs and the recent PSC Act and the impact on the industry? So your perspective on the
that's a very
more
good
recent
question.
one compared to the old ones. What can we learn from the two, so to speak?
Okay, I think without even knowing the question whether I alluded to it while answering yours. I said the 93 PSCs are currently the only ones that are producing. The reason is this: the recent PSCs are designed in such a way that the fiscal terms are more demanding, in quote now, demanding on the producers. The government has put in place terms that give more benefit to the government and less benefit to the operators. And for the operators, if your project doesn't get to a minimum investment threshold for which a decision needs to be made, generally they pull out of it. And this is possibly one of the reasons why you haven't seen much happening in the exploration phase in the country today. Simply put, I remember having a discussion with the NNPC executives some years back in the course of the discussions of the PIB. And one of the suggestions we put across to them is to ensure that we put in place incentives to encourage exploration in the industry. And for as long as the exploration is not encouraged, it means that nobody's exploring. And if there's no exploration, you will not have development. With no development, you will have more oil. Direct implication is in the long term, what you have is the oil that is discovered is what you're producing. And after a while, it begins to go down. And with no replacement, you can just draw a downward curve to see how long it's going to last. But if you have an active exploration that's encouraged in the industry, then what you are going to have is your replacement ratio, meaning the oil you produce is replaced by the new finds in the year. It means you have a plateau. You have a longer volume to be produced in the country moving forward. So in a nutshell, the fiscal terms that are in the more recent PSs are more stringent, if you may. I use the word stringent to suggest that it is more beneficial to the government and less beneficial to the operators.
Okay, thank you for that. We still have quite a few questions and we have only about 5 minutes or so. Victor Nze is asking this, and I wonder if you can speak to it. What is the risk sharing? I wonder if you also meant revenue sharing formula for the NNPC exploration in the Chad basins, as well as those in the Niger Republic borders. I don't know if you have any insights into that.
Say that again.
Well, for some reason that question has left
because I had Chad basin
field right now. Yes, basically it was a question around what you know about the risk sharing. I wonder if you meant revenue sharing formula for exploration in the Chad basin and the borders of Niger Republic, if you have any insight into that.
Okay, I am not privy to the contracts in the Chad basin, but whatever be the case, your contract, whether it's Chad basin or the Niger Delta or shallow water, deep water, your contract defines who gets what. What I have to say concerning the Chad basin has more to do with the risks associated with the petroleum system. If the petroleum system works, if you remember one of the slides I showed you, you have to have the right source, you have to have the right reservoirs, migration, all of that needs to come together for you to have oil and gas. Now, if that system is not functioning effectively, then it doesn't make any difference because you can make exploration and find nothing.
All right. Another quick question. Felix Douglas is asking, why is it that the government only shares profit but don't bear the loss? I guess they are smart, right?
Yeah, they're
the
smart.
companies that take all the risks.
Absolutely. That's why it's actually a PSC, and that's the distinction between the PSCs and the JVs. And it's for that reason that the operators are saying, if we're taking all of this risk, we need to have a good balance of the net benefit when something begins to come out from our exploration efforts.
All right. Okay, another question from Adewale Sonyaolu. It appears that there is no PSC. Okay, I'm sorry. I wonder if this is part of another question. It appears there is no PSC or gas. Why is this so? So unfortunately, that's not very clear. Apologies. Okay, let's move on to the next question from Azu. How will the new PIB that is now at the National Assembly?
Let me answer that. I think it's probably important to make a comment on that.
Oh, there is no PSC for gas.
Yes.
Sorry. Now I get it. I apologize. Now I get it. I think it's clearer now. Yes, and I think you got it before I did. Okay, so go ahead.
The PSCs we have today essentially cover the oil reserves.
Yeah.
So discovered. In the event that you make a discovery that is gas, essentially, the government says you need, depending on the PSC you have, it says you need to come back to the government for a negotiation about who owns what in terms of how you develop it and in terms of how the benefits coming from the gas is shared. So the PSC we have is oil, but it gives you a window to come in and negotiate with the government in the event that you make a gas discovery. And the terms you so agree from your discussions with the government will define how you manage the gas reserves.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so Azu is asking, how will the new PIB now at the National Assembly impact the future of exploration in the oil and gas industry? Will there be any effect on the question of a better deal for host communities, for example?
That's a very interesting question. I think First of all, I would like to say that we'd like to see a copy of the bill, first of all. As you probably know, this is one bill that the government is keeping very close to their chest. And a copy is yet to be released to the industry for comments. But that said, if we are to draw learnings from the previous versions of the bill, and depending on how much of the past versions are being put into this new version, clearly you can say that there is a lot of consideration for the host community. So, but to what extent, I don't know until we see the bill. With respect to exploration, I do hope, I haven't seen, but I sincerely do hope that the government puts appropriate incentives in place to encourage exploration activities, because without exploration activities, you don't have any more reserves. Your reserve growth is actually negative. The desire of the government to grow its reserve base to 40 billion will just be a nice dream, because only exploration will find you that. And the way to get it done is put in place the right fiscal terms, put in place the right incentives for exploration, so that the operators can look at all of this and say, yes, in the event that we do make a discovery, we have the potential of, first of all, recovering our investment. Keep in mind that for the deep water, your financial exposure could be as high as $15 billion. So we need to be able to have enough to recover our investment and have enough profit for our investors. And at the same time, this needs to be balanced with the government's objectives.
All right, I would like to make the next few, like a rapid fire style question and answer, so that I can get through them and we can move on to the next session. Kayode Akunda is asking, how many PSCs do we have in all, of which you mentioned 93 are operational? Do you have an idea how many PSCs are out there?
We do have the 93 PSCs, which were the very first set of PSCs. Then we have the 2000 PSC.
Yes, do you have an idea how many?
I would say there are possibly three, okay. Which is the 93, the 2000, and then there was the 2005, 2006, or thereabout. There might be a few others in between, but these are the three major ones. Now, the 2005, 2006 PSC are the ones that introduced the downstream obligations, where the operators were supposed to take on downstream obligations like building of rail lines, refineries, and all of that. But as you can tell, none of those PSCs are functional today.
Okay.
Just a quick clarification. So, because in the way this question was asked, speaker is referring to 1993 PSC, not 93 PSCs.
Yes.
Oh.
93 PSC. Sorry. Yes.
Got it. 1990. Okay. Okay. So I guess it's useful to.
There's three sets just to help add that.
Thank you for that. Yeah. 1993, 2000, and 2005, 2006. So three of them.
I think, I don't know what's going on. I think data. Now, I heard feedback. Oh, okay. I don't know what happened. All right. Let's go back to. Okay. So Adeola Yusuf mentioned. You mentioned on more than 2 occasions that oil exploration and production are highly challenging, but there is an influx into these firms despite the challenges. What are the challenges, and why should firms keep investing despite all the challenges? Yusuf is from Platform.
Okay. The oil and gas, just to put it in perspective, one liter of water, Ragoli's water, is more expensive than 1 liter of oil. You know that. So why is it that people don't go into water production? Why do we go into oil and gas production? The oil and gas is long. The risks are clearly there, as I mentioned earlier on. And the risks are multifaceted. And from the beginning, I did mention that from your exploration onto the production of your first barrel for export, you do not make any money. In the case of the deep water, you need to, first of all, come up with as much as $15 billion. Now, if you do notice, many of the indigenous players who are coming into the industry are coming in to buy off producing assets. They are not coming in to get into the exploration aspects. So they are not taking the exploration risk. The exploration risks are being borne by the IOCs who, as people say, have deeper pockets, and I put that in quote. They do have deeper pockets, not because they have the funds to throw away, but because they are looking at the long term. They are looking at taking the risks that are able to produce for them fields that have the 500 and above million barrel threshold. That for the indigenous players, the independent players who are coming in, they are coming in basically to take advantage of the fact that someone else has taken the exploration risk, has made discoveries. And in the world today, once you can demonstrate that you do have oil in place and you are able to produce the oil, then of course you can have financing from banks to be able to produce it. But you have to deal with the movement of the price of the crude. If at the time you made your investment, the price of the crude was $50, $60, $80 a barrel, and then you come to what happened earlier on this year where the barrel was being sold for less than $20, then that's a major financial exposure for you. And if the $20, $30 scenario is maintained over a long period of time, so the same barrel you are producing, you are actually making a loss from it. If you look at what happened in West Texas earlier on in this year, the producers were actually paying people to come and collect the oil from them because it was costing them more to produce and keep. So these are some of the risks you need to contend with, but in the long term, you contemplate all of these risks at the time you are making your investment, put a factor to it, and put in place your mitigation and be able to define for yourself how much of that you're able to control. And if the net impact from your economic analysis suggests that you will be able to come through, then of course you go ahead with that investment. So the oil and gas companies will do their sensitivities for the different price scenarios, whether it's $20 or $50 or $100, as the case may be. Each company has its own parameters. And once you meet those financial economic thresholds, a call is made whether to proceed or not to proceed with any investment.
All right. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, you can see and hear you.
My apologies. I have been. Sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
All right, great. My apologies. I had to improvise with my phone. So I'm just having some challenges with the internet today. So sincere apologies. But I think at this point, we really have to move on. So thank you so much, George, for taking questions and of course for your presentation. It's been really highly appreciated and provided some useful insights into the sector. So many thanks for that. We'll have to move on now, and I'm going to now invite our next speaker. And I believe she's already standing by. The next session will be on data and digital journalism, effective tools for data-driven reporting. And we have the pleasure of having the growth editor at Ceres Business, Yvette Dimiri, joining us for that. So Yvette, if you can just share your. Okay, great, Yvette. Thank you so much. All right, so on that note, Yvette, as you can see, I'm sure. Yes, I can hear you clearly. I'll just yield to you so you can open your presentation. We are already running over a little bit.
Okay.
Hopefully you can take some questions after a while.
Okay, great. Let me go ahead and get started. Okay, great. So thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here and to talk to you about some of the work that I do with Ceres Business and I've done since I've been in media with data and digital journalism. Okay, so the story I want to tell today has something to do with the tantalizers on Admiralty Road, something to do with the Financial Times, and also something to do with the Ekiti State Governor. but we'll come back to these in just a moment. First, I just want to give you a background about who I am and perhaps how I got here. I started my career working for a owner and operator of drilling rigs, primarily in swamp and shallow offshore. And then I changed industry and career to work for Business Day. And there I led their digital transformation. So traditionally a print paper organization and transitioning to digital. And then earlier this year, I started with Stairs Business as their growth editor. And there I'm responsible for all products that are facing readers and subscribers, as well as growing the reach of their organization. And some background on Stairs, we are a data-focused, data-driven information company. And we like to think of ourselves as turning the media model on its head in a way. So essentially, a lot of times media companies hire writers, journalists to cover specific industries. We prefer to hire people with industry expertise coming from KPMG, et cetera, to then turn them into journalists. So I will start by talking about digital journalism. And the reason why digital is crossed out here is because I think of digital as really just part of the toolkit for for journalists, right? All of a sudden you have much more, many more tools, many more ways to tell your story more effectively. And of course, this applies whether or not you're working in a newsroom or as a communications professional, the same applies. So speaking of the arsenal that you have to tell your stories with, it's really about selecting the form, style, and platform that you want to tell, that you want to communicate with. And today you can choose, you have a plethora of choices. After all, a few months ago in the US, some people who Donald Trump had blocked sued because all of a sudden he's using Twitter, to share policy. And they said that, they needed it to stay on top of what's going on in the world, and they won, essentially. So all of a sudden we have all these qualified means of journalism, actually. And so there's also an increased urgency about digital journalism, and I'll just share some data about why that is. This is a study done by Reuters Institute in Oxford University. And while they did not cover Nigeria, they did cover South Africa and Kenya. And we can sort of use them as proxies for what's also happening in Nigeria. And you'll notice that of their respondents, the majority stated that they prefer to get their news online and with social media. Same thing for Kenya, South Africa. And then if you look on the right-hand side, the trend, you can see people getting news from social media going up, and as well as online media. And then people getting news from print sources is trending down. We can look specifically at Nigeria's print decline, and this is from a paper on the decline of the media industry. And so the latest data we have available for daily newspapers sold in Nigeria was around 300,000 back in 2009. Now, anybody working in the industry would tell you that number would have declined sharply. And of course, the pandemic will exacerbate that even more. A number of houses were contemplating whether or not to stop printing at all because of the pandemic. So this is just to show that there is increased urgency to get your stories, your communication online. Oops, sorry. Okay, this is more or less the same thing, social media, so I'll just move on from this. Again, this slide was to communicate how digital is changing the economics of a lot of media houses, locally and internationally as well, whether it means you're having to make decisions around ad spending or letting go of staff. Now, digital journalism comes with its own downsides, which is the prevalence of misinformation. I understand that Tony's presentation is going to speak to that, speak to fake news. Coming off the back of this pandemic and previously with Ebola, you can just remember the plethora of fake news transmitted via WhatsApp, via Twitter, that organizations have spent a lot of time fighting. Okay, so that's my brief on digital journalism. And now we get to the meat, which is data journalism. So if you think about the question, what is data journalism? Simply put, it is telling your story through data. And I like to think of it as primarily held up by two principles. You're keeping data at the core and you're presenting it objectively. I think these things are what make data journalism particularly powerful. We know from the research at Steers that we've done with our readers that they associate data with trustworthiness. Of course, I think there was a popular saying, there are two types of lies, damn lies and statistics. It's true that you can use data to present the information you want, but for the most part, the general public associates data with a non-biased kind of view. And data journalism itself has kind of evolved in three parts, but all three parts are very much still being used today. So if you think of data journalism 1.0, you're talking about structured data, tables, graphs, that sort of thing. 2.0, computer assisted, all of a sudden you can do neat things with how you present your data, visualizations. And then 3.0 is more data science backed or inspired, if you will. So here, similar to what we do at Steers, you're bringing on board data scientists to sift through large, vast amounts of data and to bring out insights for your audience, for your readers, your public. So here I just have some examples of data journalism. This was the Bloomberg tracker, or it's still live, of course, showing how the coronavirus cases have spread all over the world. And then on the right, we have something that we worked on at Steers, which was tracking policy responses for different states in Nigeria in response to the coronavirus pandemic. So when it comes to oil and gas, of course, data journalism is particularly challenged, but also in that there are tremendous opportunities. So the challenges are, of course, the opacity of the industry. There tends to be generally a lack of data, a lack of, really just lack of data. So you constantly have to ask a question, if I want to tell this story, how do I get this data? And of course, specifically if you're working in a newsroom, traditionally journalists will have output pressure. So you need to turn out 3 stories a day, 2 stories a day. And some of these data journalism projects and visualizations can take time. And then lastly, concerns about impact. If I tell the story, will it achieve the desired result, or will it be flooded by ads from the company I'm writing about in response to what I'm saying? So I want to address some of those. So where do you get the data? Of course, if you're in journalism, you likely, and writing about oil and gas, you likely have sources in a lot of regulating bodies. In addition, the National Bureau of Statistics is a very good source. There are international sources that also keep data sets that you can dig into, whether it's the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative or BP's sort of annual report. Oil and gas, Africa Oil and Gas Report has also traditionally kept interesting data sets that I'm sure if you reach out, Tony will be happy to oblige. So I think that there are places to get started. So just some ideas there. And of course, there are a lot of stories to tell. I know that whenever we write stories at Steers about oil and gas, they always traditionally do well. And that's largely because of the opacity in the industry. People just don't know what's going on. They don't know how it works. So even if it's the simplest story of how a well gets drilled, there are data and data visualizations that you can use to effectively tell those stories. So finally, I want to just show some pieces that I think are particularly excellent pieces of data journalism. And so I'm going to click on a few links. Hopefully there's no disruption here. Okay, this is loading. I thought that might happen. Okay, so we've preloaded this one. So this was a piece done not by a media house, but by, I think, an advocacy group focused on fracking in California. So they gathered data about everywhere where fracking activity was going on, how it affected water quality, all sorts of things. And they put it together to this very interesting and interactive data visualization project. Of course, to do this sort of thing, you need a number of people on your team, but I just wanted to show what's possible. Similarly, let's go to this one. Great. So this is another interesting piece about gas flaring. So something like this was done with Flourish, which is a free Google tool that you can use to create interactive visualizations like this. And I'll get to tools later. Okay, so I think we can move on from here. Now, if you're really interested in developing your abilities in data journalism, there are a lot of people that you can follow, but I put on a few. Of course, I have to plug Steers Business and our data journalists and data scientists, and Yekan, as well as, of course, the international media houses that are doing excellent data journalism and have specifically focused social media handles just for that. I put John Murdoch on here because I think what he did for the FT for the coronavirus tracker was particularly impressive. I think on the media, international media, they were one of the first to put that out, and it was wildly successful. Tools for taking this further. One of my favorites is this one, which I will share, provided it loads. Great. So this particular website, it gives you a range of tools that are of options. And it also allows you to sort of tell it the kinds of things that you want to do, and then it will suggest the tools that you can use. Some of these tools are free. Some of them might have a freemium version, but there are so many available. In particular, we use Data Wrapper, Tableau. We've used Flourish on occasion as well. And of course, Coursera has a number of courses on data visualization and data science if you want to take those topics further. So I would say that when it comes to getting started, and I'm just rounding up, I think you really need to keep an eye on who's doing the best work, right, in telling the kind of stories that you want to tell. You need to stay nimble and curious because I know that at the beginning of this year, for example, there was a lot of emphasis placed on learning how to use, getting our journalists and myself, how to use some of these tools. You kind of have to devote X amount of time and just say, I'm going to learn this, and that's that. So you need to stay nimble and ready to adapt. And you need preferably a team, right? When we put our visualizations together, it involves the data scientist, it will involve our designer, it will involve me sort of also gathering the data, working with our data scientists. And there are much larger projects that have huge amount of teamwork involved. So your best option is to do it together. And of course, lastly, I'll say you need to work the problem. There's a very, it's something that we say often when we face challenges at Steers, which is that action relieves anxiety. So you have to engage with the problem, with the particular worry about data that you're trying to solve, the particular story. And finally, I spoke to our data scientist just before I got on here, just for her thoughts on, if you're interested in sort of taking this much further as well. And so she says that you need to read widely, of course. Like I mentioned, you want to make sure that you're following the right people. Collaborate, of course, especially in the data science community. We reach out to a number of people, whether we're working on data science projects in-house for clients, and people are always happy to help because it's still such a nascent field. You also need to know your audience. Who are you speaking to? How much visualization do they actually want to see? Is this the best way to communicate to them? And of course, less is more. So you want to make sure that you are actually communicating the story as opposed to doing a lot of fancy things with design. Yeah, so that's 4 and 5, I guess, combined. Finally, so back to the initial slide that I opened with. Earlier this year, before we started working from home, we had noticed at Sears that our traffic was starting to fall just a little bit, just as the coronavirus anxiety was kicking in. And then we saw the Financial Times tracker that was tracking global cases. And so we thought, okay, people are, they are trying to feed their anxiety, so to speak. They're looking for answers. How do we play in this information gap? How do we provide utility to our readers and the wider public? We do not and still don't have as much resources as larger newsrooms, Vanguard, Punch, etc. Our newsroom was even smaller then than it is now. But what we decided to do was to create something that we thought would be long lasting. So we were one of the first to create dashboards specifically for Nigeria cases. Of course, later NTDC adopted this. We created the cases on a logarithmic scale so people could understand the rate of change when it comes to how cases were developing. And then finally, we created a tracker so people could see how policies were being implemented all over the country. This one was particularly interesting because it got the attention of numerous government officials who were kind of using it to push one agenda or the other, which is part of the reason why I'm such a fan of data journalism. It does create impact, and I think it's a really important opportunity to do so. Where people take it, you don't always know, but as the person working on the project, going back to the earlier point I made, your job is to provide the facts, to present them objectively, and to keep the data at the core of your story. And finally, I'll just leave with this, which is that I think the unique opportunities with digital and data journalism is all of a sudden you have such a number of tools, a plethora of tools to think about what is the best way to tell your story. Yeah, so I'll take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Yvette. Very useful insights, as expected. You've obviously been in this space, and I'm sure everyone can use the knowledge you've shared, and you've generated a lot of interest in this. I can already see a comment saying very interesting session. And okay, before I turn it to the attendees to also ask their questions, and again, I want to encourage everyone, if you do have questions, please put it in the Q&A field, and hopefully we can have Yvette chime in and discuss your questions. I wanted to get your thoughts about data science projects potentially, and the thinking around that. My sense is that potentially these could be very expensive projects in the context of the typical budget of a newsroom. So I was just wondering your perspective on the smart thinking around that. We have oil and gas correspondents and journalists in the room today. Potentially they would like to make some impact with their stories using data. How do they get around the potential cost of gathering data?
Yeah, thanks, Wale. I think you're right. It's always going to be expensive, either on your time or in monetary form. So I can give an example of the coronavirus policy response tracker that we created for looking at how different states were adopting policies in response to the coronavirus. So that took about 2 weeks, yeah, maybe a bit shorter than 2 weeks of just looking through news, looking through government announcements. We had one of our engineers write a script to scour government handles for information on what they were doing in terms of the coronavirus, and that took a lot of time, but not tremendous amount of money to create, right? So long as I'm assuming that you already have a platform that you're ready to publish to. That kind of a project, really, we did it on Google Sheets predominantly, was updated as we received additional updates. I do think though that it's important to know that with these projects, you can either do as little as you want or as much as you want. So one thing I didn't mention is data journalism actually I didn't mention at the beginning, is also just, putting graphs, interesting graphs and interesting tables on the stories that you're telling. So that's already a sort of low burn way to get involved in these fields. When we do those kind of pieces, we always make sure that any kind of text that we're adding is limited. So again, you're keeping the data at the forefront of the story, and at most, maybe you're sharing a bit of insight to accompany the tables or the charts that you're placing.
All right, excellent. In terms of incentivizing people to get into this space, because I imagine when you think about journalism, you're thinking about writing stories, but this is somewhat different. This is just about gathering data, and hopefully the data tells the story. And many may suggest that that is not an incentive to get into it, but can you speak to the gain or the benefit of moving in this direction from your experience at Stairs, and how it impacts what you're doing overall?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can definitely understand how you might just prefer to just, keep the story simple, write some text and push it out. But the incentive for us, and I think hopefully for all journalists, is the opportunity for impact, right? You can imagine instead of somebody sifting through thousands of news clippings like we did to create the policy response data, you can now just see it in one place and request a data set, which numerous people have done, even at international organizations. And I think that's the opportunity, it's to show people something, right? That's something that's not easy to see without these kind of visualizations. Yeah, I mean, of course, there are all sorts of awards for best visualization if that's also your motivation.
That could be an incentive too, right? Okay.
Yes,
obviously.
absolutely.
No doubt. I mean, we all want to win awards, no doubt. Okay, but I think it's a great topic to have here, especially in the context of Nape, because as you know, Nape is all about petroleum, exploring for petroleum. Data is at the center of that, no doubt. So I wanted to, and so as a result, this is a very relevant conversation to have. You mentioned impact, and if I may invite Latif, the publicity secretary, or perhaps even the president, to chime in here in terms of your thoughts about areas that you think could be potential low-hanging fruits for journalists to look into in terms of trying to get the data out so you can make the impact. I mean, one of the areas in oil and gas that we continue to hear much about in terms of data is rig count. So people typically talk about rig count, and from the rig count, you get a sense of how much activity is happening, and you can already make up your own mind about how whatever is happening at the time, it could be maybe some restiveness in the Niger Delta, and how that is impacting oil exploration or production at the time. The rig count tells you the story. If the rig count is increasing, there's more activity. If the rig count is declining, there's less activity. So I was wondering, maybe Latif or the president, or maybe even our other speakers, Mr. Akiosho and George, you could also chime in here. And I think this is a very interesting area. If we have any ideas on potential areas that you could perhaps suggest to our journalists to look into if they would like to use data to make impact. All right, while we wait for that, okay, do we have any comments? George, you want to say something?
Well,
okay, Latif. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I think, who's that? Was that the president? That's the president.
That was me. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, George. I'll listen. I'll talk after you do.
Okay, I was actually, thank you again, Yvette. That was very insightful. I think we are getting into a very interesting phase in the oil and gas industry with the PIB. And I think the press will do great to go beyond the rhetorics. The general communication is the PIB is good for Nigeria. And that's a good comment to me, but what is it about the PIB that is good? And I think it's important that the press takes time to actually dig into the necessary data that should help to have a balanced view of what is being proposed versus what the industry is actually asking for. It could be that both sides are maybe operating from two different extremes, but a balanced view from the media would be very, very important, rather than just quoting whoever says something that, look, this is good for everyone, because it just might not be the case. We need to have a balanced PIB that ensures that what the government wants and what the industry wants are both achieved in such a way that the industry is kept alive for the next generation. So thank you very much, Yvette, for that insight.
All right. Thank you very much, George.
If I may chime in. So our country is fundamentally driven by the oil and gas industry, right? And there's a huge gorge of information. People just really don't know what we do. And there are multiple reasons why people don't know. From the fact that it's actually a very large industry and it's a complex industry, to it's a highly technical industry. Or even when you peel off those layers, I think we really do need our partners in journalism to help not just bridge that gap, but also provide accurate and appropriately context information. And one of the most powerful tools to do that is just sharing that data the way it is. Let people make the inferences they want to make. You know, so when you start to share information like, when was the last time an actual exploration oil well, when was it drilled? You know, and by who? And in what terrain? This information is not it's not state secret, it's not highly classified or confidential. It's information that is out there. Information like Mr. George shared earlier on, we've had several PSC 10s. If they're all so fantastic, how come it's just one of them that has resulted in actual production in deep water? You know, so understanding that type of information, it coming from the media, allows the public to look at things a little untainted, because hopefully the media is perceived to be coming from a relatively neutral basis. Now, I don't want to take, because there's some questions Wale needs to address, and I know my president is also poised at adding one or two comments to that.
All right, thank you so much, Latif. Yes, so let me take a few of the questions before I go to the president. Adiola Yusuf is asking, how has COVID-19 made data journalism more essential for journalism practice in Nigeria? So Yvette, maybe you can just speak to that in general. Obviously, you've spoken to your experience at STAIRS, but do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think the way I think about it is, it's generally, you know, of course, it's been this terrible thing that's befallen us globally, but I think generally it's been good for media, information consumption. Maybe not so much on the commercial side, but certainly on the reach and impact side. Like I mentioned earlier, there are a couple of media houses, The Guardian, internationally, The Guardian, Financial Times, for example, that have recorded record reach in terms of the coronavirus products specifically. If you think about the FT tracker, the one they use to track cases all over, developing all over the world. There are also explainers about coronavirus that have done very well. Specifically in Nigeria, I think it's been an opportunity for us. I know that we've used it. One, because information all of a sudden, especially from, you know, government bodies, whether you think about NCDC or this presidential task force, they've had to all of a sudden have this impetus to put more information forward. So for journalists, we have consumed that, you know, a lot. And I think generally it's been good in that respect. Whether or not it's spurred on specifically data journalism, that I'm not so sure. But again, if you're engaged in thinking about what the best way to tell your story is, I know we've opted for data journalism just because of the amount of information out there.
All right, thank you very much. We have another question here. What steps are to be taken if you have data and you want to turn it into stories? Maybe some perspective on that. Maybe how you typically would use data. I don't know if you want to share any perspective on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you want to know what story you want to tell before you start thinking about how to present it, that's for sure. So you want to do some analysis on the data yourself, whether you're looking at trend analysis, I know it depends on the data, but you need to have some idea of what's interesting about this data. What do you want to show? And that you do, in private on your own. And then you can, I put some websites on there on tools that can help you. It's a website that helps you select the right tool to tell the best kind of story that you want to tell. So if you're looking at a map visualization, or you're looking at, you want to put in tabular form, I would say once you know the kind of story you want to tell, then you want to think about how you want it to look. Yeah, I would say those are probably the two most important steps.
All right, thank you. I have one more question here. What in specific terms have you not seen media organizations in Nigeria do on data journalism? So maybe you're trying to get some perspective on how you're seeing things done in Nigeria and what is not being done that you think potentially should be done with respect to data journalism. And then, sorry, there's a follow-on to this. How do you advise them to do the specifics? So how do they get started, so to speak, in doing what potentially you think they aren't doing enough of?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing I want to see more of, especially where the larger media houses are concerned, is data science in the newsroom. Putting data scientists in there. I think that there are, there's so many areas where we have a large amount of data available. Whether, you want to partner with any technology company that has access to these amounts of data, numerous partnerships happen in newsroom, but people will provide you the data and you have a data scientist that can, write some scripts to go through it or create a machine learning algorithm to do that. I haven't seen a lot of that, and it's something that I know is happening a lot, especially when you think about Bloomberg, Masters of Data, FT. They have huge teams of data scientists working on these large data sets that are also available in Nigeria.
If I can follow up on that, I mean, that's a very interesting point. I know data science is like a really evolving area that is being used in different industries. But more specifically to journalism, would you say it would be a huge investment to employ a data scientist, or do you think that there are ways around it? Because I think usually you will have to incentivize people to make the big investments, maybe by just experiencing the impact. And so if they can experience it in a way that is cost effective, for example, I don't know if this is conceivable. Could we have an intern that is a data scientist? Just say.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing me back. There are very cost-effective ways to do it. Whether on an intern is a great one. There are communities on Twitter where there's sort of junior data scientists available, people who are just learning and want to practice. So absolutely, an intern is a way to go. I would say also for maybe isolated projects, you can use any of these freelance platforms. It's not something I've done, but I'm sure it's available. Everything, whether it's Upwork, they all have all these sorts of things on there. So those are the most cost-effective ways to do it. Generally, hiring a data scientist will require some resources. Yes, I think they're one of the better paid careers out there now. So Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much. It's been really good speaking with you. I'd like to now invite the president to chime in here. Mr. Tucker, I know you wanted to comment on some points made in the previous presentation, and I wonder if you also have some comments about this discussion that Yvette has had with us. Mr. Tucker, I hope you're still with us. Okay, excellent. All right, please go ahead. If you can unmute yourself so we can hear you. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I want to thank you and also to especially welcome Yvette Demiri for a wonderful presentation. I've been very close to the Demiris for over 2 decades. I'm excited to be seeing one of them here doing a wonderful presentation to us. I want to go back to the last question that was asked when George made his presentation with respect to revenue sharing formula for exploration campaigns in the Chad Basin and Benue Trough. I want to start by saying that the sitting president of Nape happened to have been one of the west side geologists in the Chad Basin about 1992 as a west side geologist on Masu 1 exploration well in the Chad Basin, and happened to also be one of the team members of the team that handled Kurmani River 2 appraiser in Benue Trough. On that note, I want to let us know that every responsible oil producing nation, it is bound on the government to invest in exploration, especially when crude oil contributes a lot to the economy of the nation. The exploration campaign in the Chad Basin didn't require any sharing of revenue or funding for the project. It was a mandatory requirement for the Nigerian government at that time to carry out, being an oil producing nation, for the benefit of the nation. Exploration is capital intensive. A lot of investors shy away from it, but the benefits are much. So in most cases, government will not wait for any investor to come in before carrying out exploration. Both what transpired in the Chad Basin and what is currently going on in the Benue Trough, those exploration campaigns are Nigerian government required funding arrangements. This is to send the clear message to the journalists that are part of this program. Every oil producing nation is required to invest in exploration for the benefit of the nation and the stakeholders. Over 200 million Nigerians are stakeholders in the oil and gas in Nigeria. So for government to invest in it to help oil the economy of the nation does not require waiting for investors. It is usually when that is done that investors come in to invest, because at that stage, like currently the blocks in the Benue Trough as is, the economic of the blocks has been optimized. So at this stage, nobody have any cause to be wondering about the risk associated, because commercial discovery have been made and many more of such are being expected. There's nothing to hide any longer. And I want to believe at the stage we are, many IOCs and other investors by now will be having some background discussions, possibility of partnering with the NNPC and Nigerian government to get involved now that they have confirmed. And the confirmation, I'm happy to announce here, just like the GMD said at the opening ceremony last year, that it's an in-house effort, totally in-house effort of NNPC geoscientists and engineers. No external contribution. We're very proud of it, and we want to say it at any time there's any opportunity. In terms of data and analysis, I'm excited about this, and you will accept the fact that Since the current GMD assumed office last year, about July, you'll notice that being a ranking member of this professional body and a distinguished fellow of Nape, so much information is being dished out as it is. For the first time, we hear about auditing and everything going on. Almost every little thing going on is very transparent, is very open, and journalists need to just pick this information and it's being given so that you don't add things to these facts to attract customers. I'm very happy with reports from oil and gas reports. I don't know whether it's because the owner is one of us and a distinguished fellow of Nape. The quality of the report, journalists that don't have access to data should create time to read it. Oil and gas report is the publisher is a distinguished fellow of Nape. The information there is real. There's a lot of research. Phone calls are made, emails are exchanged. Almost every information you see in oil and gas report is real. Borrow a little from that. Let's show data when we report. Coming to exploration, the rig count is down. We're not in doubt. Exploration is expensive. Under this COVID pandemic, investors will be scared. It's understood. It's global. It's not a Nigerian issue. And a responsible company owned by government like the NNPC, it shouldn't surprise us that the NNPC is still exploring because NNPC works for the interests of over 200 million Nigerians. So no matter the pandemic, the drilling of exploration well is ongoing currently in the Benue Trough. And that is being done to optimize those blocks so that government can make some money and production will be sustained for the benefit of over 200 million Nigerians. Time will not permit me. Maybe as we progress, I may have more things to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Carter, thank you very much for your comments there. And moving on very quickly, you've just spoken to the publisher of the Africa Oil and Gas Report, and we're going to be hearing from him because he is making the next presentation. So on that note, I'd like to yield now to Kafe Akiosho, the publisher of Africa Oil and Gas Report, to make his presentation, and he's speaking on that, right, a very controversial topic of fake news. So Tony, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Nape, for having me. Thank you, Mr. President, for that very long free advertisement. I'd like to thank my co-panelist, Ms. Ve Demiri, for that long, advertising. I mean, we actually had our logo beside organizations like Bloomberg, and thank you very much. What I'm going to present is not, I mean, the two speakers have actually delivered everything. So my own, and they are very hard acts to follow. When I was watching Yet's presentation, I thought, if you're talking about the master class in digital journalism, this is some aspect of that. And there was a whole lot of material that George Ogwachuba gave out, a whole lot in terms of how you, quite understand the value chain. So what I have really, if you're talking about fake news, and much of what I put here are essentially what you all know. So what I hope we can do is the conversation we'll have afterwards. It's not so much like the very smart deliverables that you had, delivered by those two earlier speakers. So yes, oil and gas reporting in the world of fake news. All right. This is something that we generally put together. I mean, Philip Ajebeli, Nape, Latif, and Modu. I mean, this is essentially also a Nape paper itself. All right, please, next slide. Next slide, please. So what is the brief is, you know, we go through a series of a number of different, you know, I don't want to call them, they are not departments, just a number of, we just look at a number of things. What is fake news? How long have fake news been around? You know, what's, you know, how do you make yourself fake news proof? You to develop a critical mindset. And what I think what is most critical here is checking the source, checking the source, checking the source. A lot of the time there will be a lot of some material will be out there in public space, and journalists also, my colleagues will be sharing it as if it's a fact, whereas we can actually reach out to DPR. You know, our job actually provides the most access of any jobs in the world. Please move back. Okay, so what is fake news? This is clearly false information, you know, out there to either mislead, or most of the time, what you have that you call fake news is actually out of sheer ignorance. You know? So it might not be intended to mislead. You know, it's that the sender really doesn't know that particular detail. So these are false stories. You know, and there are stories that are straight from the truth, of course. So there are those kind of fake news in which, you know, the fake newser is just trying to make a point. And fake news have been around forever. You know, you know the story of the village gossip. You know, Abe. Anyway, I'm struggling to remember the name of the lady who was Amebo, yeah, of village headmaster. Next slide, please. Next slide, yeah. So in the past century, I guess more like in the past 20, 25 years, there's been a very exponential growth in fake news. A lot of newspapers have come out, you know, many of them poorly staffed, and people sit near the window and conjure up things. You know, you just sit in your office and, you know, you write up something. Even in organizations that are top notch, you know, I remember the story of, I guess the news. It was the same supposedly most important newspaper in the world, the New York Times. And this guy wrote a series, you know, of sketches of detailed information about some drug addicts. And it was entirely false. Which means that he was putting out fiction out of his own mind, you know, very, very fertile mind. And he won the Pulitzer, you know, over time. And he won the Pulitzer, and that had to be withdrawn, and he was expelled. You know, nobody was interested in picking him up anymore. He was so even in reputable newspapers, you can have that tendency. And in this case, he wasn't trying to be mischievous. He just wanted to be seen as a star reporter. He didn't know that something will happen, that he will be found out. Now that we share information, you know, across various platforms, Facebook, Twitter, people can do anything, and you know, if they have a modicum of integrity, or they happen to people who have large followership, a lot of people believe them. The president of the United States will come out and say, how can you, for example, argue with the president of the United States, even if he's lying? And it has been the job of the American media to push back a lot of the time because that's supposed to be a believable character is an institution, but it does is one of those people who peddle fake news. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things that our job really is to do our work so well. We get to the source, we get to institutions that provide the information regarding that aspect of the news every time that we're writing any copy. We check and cross-check so that we can also be the kind of credible sources that CNN and BBC are considered trustworthy sources. What Mr. Trump has done is to undermine even those institutions. And so a reporter from the New Yorker, which is a very significant news gathering entity, comes and asks a question and he rubbishes him. So it's a very difficult. Anyone who is watching, there are people who wonder because you have to believe the president of the United States. You have to take him seriously. And so if he says CNN is a purveyor of fake news, how do you handle that? So this is very difficult. So as I say, you ought to be going to credible institutions to check and cross-check. But you would assume that a credible institution is the president of a country like the United States. So it's difficult. But in any case, we do, to a large extent, most of us listen to these global news platforms because we do believe they are credible. Because they have, bigger news gathering capacity than any other major news platform on the planet. So that's why I've mentioned that if you want to identify credible sources, those are some of those organizations. Yet mentioned, if she mentioned Bloomberg, Financial Times, yes, these are organized, and it also has something to do with age. One of the challenges of Nigerian journalism is that newspapers come and wither over time and disappear. The major newspapers today were not there. Some of the most important newspapers today were not there 40 years ago. So Vanguard is a 35-year-old company. Punch is probably the oldest, of the big ones. Who it's been there since the 70s. But there were newspapers before them, and Tribune was probably there before. But the point is that there are limits, unlike elsewhere in the world, where you could say this, platform's been there for a century and co. We had always had newspapers for quite a while. The Daily Times was a 1926 creation, which means that it ought to be getting close to be 100 years. But it's no longer, the newspaper that it was. Someone's trying to revive what that newspaper is. So, building up credibility and becoming a reference, takes a bit of time. And BBC, for example, most of us grew up knowing BBC. So that's also part of how you become credible. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a fake headline. Fake images can be used to allude ALLUDE to you. Basically, so this is it's an editorial error. What we're trying to say here is that someone can create a mock-up if some photograph, some video, on WhatsApp or on TikTok that goes viral, that everybody's seeing on the globe, and thinking that, hey, this is something that Toyin did some time ago, but really is not you. So fake news can, and it can also be part of a news material, So there are all kinds of ways that people can get up to mischief. So it's not, but what you look, the red flags that you're looking out for in some of these images are the shadows on the image or even modifications. Just, when you don't take these things at, first, at face value. Sit back and try to figure out whether, there are things you can see that makes this thing not what they look like. Next slide, please. So how to examine the facts? Well, this is something that is debatable. Fake news is often empty, containing little supporting evidence throughout the article. You'll be surprised that for quite a number of essays, that are not true, can be also quite rigorous, and people can drop their own kind of facts. But largely, a lot of these ones that are popular, don't have the kind, a lot of evidence. People don't invest too much time, enough time to work on fake news the way, people do for truthful or something that's a bit of effort. As I said, you can be quite ignorant, and drop a whole lot of hints and create a story that looks very credible. And, the truth is that it takes, and that's why we are what we do. If we have access to let us take advantage, because we as I said, okay, let me give a little bit of example. My first trip to the US, my first attempted trip to the US, I was already working for Chevron. And I was touting the fact that I was a geologist working for Chevron. And, I wasn't given the visa. Around a month after, I wanted to go to the UK for the first time. And I simply said, look, I write an art column in The Guardian every Sunday. I did not invoke geology. And I was instantly given the visa. So we were the most opportune set of professionals in the world. So let us take advantage of our calling and correct a lot of things out there. When we see something, it is our own duty to be worried about what the source is, and we're close to the source. If you pick up the phone and call the director of DPL today, even if he says that you should talk to the public affairs manager, and you insist that this one, Oga, it is him, that you'll be surprised, and we can do it, so we are the ones who are God ordained to correct all the fake news challenges in the world. Once it is out there, fake news can cause massive mistrust and confusion, which is why we're having this conversation. And a lot of people are beginning to, look at even credible stories in credible newspapers or credible platforms and tagging them to the fake news. There are a lot of people who are followers of Mr. Trump who just believe what he says, mailing ballots are scams, are all entirely scams. That's fake news, but no, once the president himself has dropped it, it takes a whole lot of work for anybody, but that's our job. We need, and you can notice that the CNN tries to do it all the time. He tries to, take it apart, and they have amazing set of fact checkers. So next Next slide, please. Social media has, has stoked the fire, of fake news. Anyone with an internet connection. I mean, I'm sure that you read all kinds of stuff on Facebook, and you just wonder where these guys have come from, And so, and the thing is that whether Mr. Zuckerberg, agrees or not, Facebook is a major newspaper. It doesn't create its own content. Everybody goes to put some of their own content. So, and that is probably the newspaper of the future. The way that you probably will be creating newspapers are likely to be that you allow people to come and drop the information, and then you curate. You do the hard job of editing, and you will have to install those kind of algorithms that enable a lot of people to come to your space and provide whatever. But in unlike Facebook, you are not going to just, it's not going to be instant publishing. You have to sit down and walk around and do a lot of work of cleaning up these things. So social media has a higher chance of being believed, which is now, because those a lot of people don't even have the time or the patience to go to read a Punch website, or read what the Vanguard is saying, or the Daily Trust, which more likely would have taken the material from the credible institutions and put it out there. They will just say, well, this is what was forwarded to me from from my WhatsApp group, in my WhatsApp group. Next slide, please. So what are some of the examples of fake news in Nigeria? You remember that people genuinely started to believe that Mr. Buhari was really a Sudanese clone named Jibril. They genuinely started to believe when Mr. Kanu, who who is leading a group that is very upset with the structure of the nation state, put out that fake fake news. It became so serious that President Buhari himself felt it needed. Felt that he needed to confront it directly. Let's move on to the next slide, because we really don't have too much time. During the Ebola outbreak in 2014, some leader, in Kogi, some local, chief in Kogi actually, asked people to go and bathe in salt water to avoid infection. That wasn't something that was, scientifically processed, and a lot of people took it seriously. It took some radio and TV stations to discredit. And there was some other report published by news medium that said that President Kim Jong-un of North Korea said he was planning to recolonize Nigeria. He just went, everybody was, reading it. And this news medium was not, when you say news medium, what I mean is that this was actually a valid website, that claims it is a news platform. And so people will, oh, that's a website, but there are all kinds of those kinds of websites. Let's have the next slide, please. So what has the oil industry going to do with it? Well, yet has said a lot of these things. The petroleum industry, while it's Nigeria's most economically important sector, it's also been one of the most opaque, but our opacity, has, that's why I said until the last 15 years. You remember that everything started to change when we got to the height of the Ogoni crisis, and the poet, playwright, novelist, and environmental rights campaigner, Uncle Ken, was judicially murdered, and everything unraveled. So the oil industry has been overall in these years, in the last 20 years, generally been more open, generally been more try to basically say, well, this is, and there have been all kinds of campaigners. There have been things like publish what you pay. There's been things like, 90, that, show, how much these companies pay, and so on and so forth. So do we expect, okay, so for most of the 62 years of crude oil production, the upstream segment of the sector, which generates the most income, has been run as an enclave. That has also started to change. But that is part of the job that we have to open up more of these things. So has it coped well in the consuming era of the explosion of fake news? Let's have that conversation. So the final slide, please. The next slide ought to be the final slide. Because information matters. Why is this important? The nations are built on a stream of conversations. Elite consensus necessary to build and sustain a modern state can be discouraged by anger stoked by fake news. Let us ask a question, since most of us here are reporters. Was it outrightly unjustified in 2019 to call for the sale of NNPC? It is context. What was missing in the argument was in all context. Is it possible to determine a fake news tendency in the euphoria that greeted that conversation? We did not have a debate, because everyone was saying, but that's not exactly. I mean, that's not how media should mediate in conversations. Okay, so I guess that should be all. Thank you very much. Last slide so that people can see that I said thank you. Yes. Okay,
All
so
right.
so you see,
Thank you.
that's fine. I think we should have a conversation here.
All right. Thank you so much. Useful food for thought for all the oil and gas journalists in the room. I would just, because in the interest of time, because we have sort of overrun the allotted time for the session, I'll just run through some of the questions that we have on the platform. And the first one is from Adiola Yusuf. What is the difference between fake news and sensational news and journalism? So I guess maybe he wants to hear your perspective as a journalist yourself, Twain. Fake news and sensational news.
No, sensational news is not necessarily fake news. I get you could, for example, that the way people run with the idea that the presidential candidate, the opposing gentleman to President Buhari, the way they ran with it was sensational. The thing itself was not fake news. Sensational news will be true. It can be true all the way. It is the way that you write the story. That's what lends to sensation. So it's really not. As a matter of fact, we use sensation to sell stories, and nobody. Most organizations, that's how they live. Once you get into the story itself, you find out the truth. But there might be one or two things missing on the headline. So sensationalism is not fake news. No, it's not necessarily. It's unfair to people who generally want to make money from, or rather want to run their business, fund it by tweaking the news, the headline here and there. No, I don't think it's the same. Yes.
All right. Thank you for that. And same person asked a question. There's a bit of a background to it, but I think the question is who is in the best position to define what is news and what is fake news? And I guess maybe you would like to just describe how you can make the news that you are providing credible. So maybe some perspective on that.
Okay. No, to start with, I mean, we should always go to the first principles. I mean, there's a lot of things that yet said about what what data journalism is all about. But my takeaway basically is that it's not so much. I mean, okay, so data is important, but it is the interpretation of data. That is what Latif brought to the conversation when he said, you know, I mean, somebody said, that George said, look at this 1993. Of course, we all say we know in the industry that no one has drilled anything that was bid for and won in the 2000 round. Now, Agbami is in 1993. Well, not exactly. It wasn't one of those assets, that were released in 1991 that was signed in 1993, but it was a later asset that benefited from the PSC of 1993, right? And everything that when President Obasanjo came, he felt that we should have much more, and the people who are working for him felt that, oh, okay, we've given out too much. The context is that we had discovered Bonga and we discovered Era, and we found out, as as a country, that actually there was a lot of oil in the water, which was not what we knew in 1993. So the country was trying to take advantage of that, and well, it has burned the fingers now. So
Right.
the point is how to interpret that kind of thing. It's not whether it's not. I mean, so if you do graphics, you also have to do, because there are some graphics that I see, and from a distance I'm still trying to figure out what they're trying to say. So you need to be as simple as possible. Now,
Right.
the question you ask is, so who is it that determines what is? It is the journalist who should work more and more on the data gathering before it goes out, on filtering the data through all kinds of, even if you are going to be critical, with the truth. I mean, we have the truth. I mean, you're going to basically, if you want to take on the GMD, you know, who, he's one of the most credible human beings on the planet. You still, I mean, you've got to take his perspective and put it with whatever it is that you're trying to put together. And it is us. It is the journalist who, as I said, is one of the most important people in the world. The journalist who works for a news medium should strive as much as possible to filter so much that what he puts out has gone through enough of the cleaning,
Right.
so that it can be relied on. That's it.
All right. Thank you for that. Now, there is a practical scenario that the same person has, well, a person that asked the question earlier, Adiola Yusuf, is providing a scenario here. He says, what's the impact of fake news on energy journalism in Nigeria? And he's citing that Wando has been dubbed one of the reports from Africa Oil and Gas Report on it as fake news threatening legal action. So basically, he's saying that Wando has threatened legal action against something that Africa Oil and Gas had reported. Can you share your experience on how you were able to handle this case?
I don't remember anything that Wando said, that they said. I mean, well, I'd like to know that part, because I'm supposed to be the publisher and I don't know this.
Okay.
I mean, the thing is that, you know, you have to get your facts, as I said, because you're dealing with, it's a small field. In our own case, unlike the United States, 350 million people, a vast economy. You can be in Detroit and be trying to take on Trump in Washington, and you're so far away from the guys who are consuming your material, and you don't even meet them. If you're writing about Wando, there's a likelihood that you will run into the MD of Wando in a lounge, in the same lounge in Lekki Phase 1. You understand? So that's why it is important. In our own case, we don't even have a choice to clean up as much as possible. But I would like to see this story where they said, yes.
Well, I'm simply just reading the question as it was put out there. Okay, we have really run over, so my apologies that I'm unable to take the other questions at this time. Perhaps if some of our attendees can get in touch with you after the event so that they can maybe you can share your perspective further on this whole subject of reporting in an era of fake news. Thank you so much, Mr. Kyosho, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, because we are trying to stay within the time frame for this event, and we have run over already. So if I can just share a few closing thoughts before I invite Abdulateef Amodu to more or less help us wrap things up today. So I think the presentations we've had so far have been very enlightening. I mean, obviously we started with the focus on EMP in Nigeria, and invariably we tilted to the whole conversation around production sharing contracts and how that is split and what is happening in the Niger, the Chad Basin, and around the border with Niger Republic. And I think that was quite enlightening, and that really tells us, it really gave us some insight into the developments in that area. Yvette obviously shared a very interesting conversation about data and how data journalism is evolving. I think one of the biggest takeaways there was that it's really something that we can begin to apply in our newsrooms. And she even suggested that perhaps doing something as simple as getting an intern to allow us to feel the impact of having a data scientist in the newsroom and how that could significantly impact our reporting is something that we can consider. And of course, we just heard from Mr. Tony Akinosho about the whole conversation around fake news. I think he's really spoken to the issue of sources, even though he didn't use that word. He has spoken to the importance of getting the facts right so that you can really distinguish yourself. And of course, you can deflect potential legal troubles if you do it the right way. So it has been a useful session. I want to believe most of us agree. It's already almost 11:30. So I'll hand over right now to Lateef Amodu, the Publicity Secretary at Nape, and he'll be sharing some closing comments.
All right. So the first thing first, thank you to all our session speakers. I will invite the president later on to actually do the appropriate appreciation. But before that, like Mr. Wole has alluded to, this has been an excellent group of speakers. The conversation cannot stop yet. What we are trying to do at Nape is to ensure that we, again, create those platforms where we put the seed to start the conversation. The oil and gas industry is the mainstay of the Nigerian economy right now. The plan is that we also we become the engine for the diversification of the economy. And as that is going on, we need to ensure that our partners in this industry, which includes energy correspondents, are appropriately equipped with the right tools to report what is going on in the industry accurately, in the right context, providing different viewpoints and perspectives. Having said that, it's my singular pleasure to invite our president-elect. She will share one or two things about the conference, our main conference, with you. My president-elect, are you there, ma?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, loud and clear.
All
Over
right.
to you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so delighted to be part of this interactive session with the people that help us to tell our stories. I really want to appreciate what you guys are doing to make sure that the facts about what we do and what we attempt to do get spread out within the general populace. So I would like to focus more on our upcoming conference and exhibition. Our 38th conference, it's coming up from November 15 to November 19. And it's going to be virtual for the first time ever. We have a platform where the exhibitors, the webinar series, the sessions, and then the talk, the technical papers, and the posters are going to be held. Another thing we have very different from this year is that as geoscientists, we always like to look at rocks. Since COVID-19 has kind of reduce what we can do in terms of gathering in large crowds, in large numbers, we are going to actually have a virtual field trip. So all the pre-conference activities, the trainings, the pre-conference workshop, the management session promises to be very, very interesting. The pre-conference workshop is where we actually choose a topic of burning interest to us, and we dissect it with invited eminent personalities in Nigeria who will give their viewpoint, and we actually produce a communique that is presented to the government or the government's representative at our opening ceremony. Of course, the opening ceremony is happening on the 17th of November, and we have a lineup of massively important people in Nigeria who are going to be talking at that event. Of course, we have some social events because all work and no play makes Jack or Jacqueline a dull girl. And guess what? Everything is going to be virtual. So I hope that I will see some of you on the platforms. And I just want to encourage you all to look forward to a very exciting experience. Back to you, Latif, if you have any questions.
All right, thank you very much, my President-elect and the chairperson for the Conference Planning Committee. Again, it's my honor to invite the President of Nape to appreciate our guest speakers, special guest speakers today, and also give the closing remarks. Mr. President, are you there?
Yeah, can you start my video? Okay, okay. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, our distinguished public secretary. You've been doing so wonderfully well since the lockdown. I want to start by, first and foremost, on behalf of the Executive Committee of Nape and the entire membership, extend our appreciation to the distinguished speakers for today, our very dear George Ogochua, George Ogochuba. We appreciate the Dimiri. We are very gender sensitive in Nape. You can see we had to introduce a female speaker for this event, and she has been able to handle the topic assigned quite well. We appreciate one of our distinguished fellows, the publisher of Africa Oil and Gas. I tried to do a little advert for the paper. Toyin Akinosho is a fellow of Nape. I mean, without the organizers of today's event, the public secretary and the publicity team, we appreciate you, Wale, for anchoring this program. We appreciate all participants that have made time to be a part of this memorable event. Last year, we held this very event at Intercontinental in Lagos. We couldn't have even enough people like participants like what we have today. We're over 70 participants in today's event, and it's global. Nape have taken the association to the next level. We don't want anybody to miss our event. That's why in the midst of the lockdown, we keep sustaining programs of this nature. Each participant is very important to us because each participant for this event had one thing or the other that would have taken the past 2.5 hours we have spent listening to the speakers, but you also agree with me that the event of today, almost every one of us that have taken time to be a part of it must have learned something new. And there will be better ways of reporting the oil and gas issues. It's usually very frustrating when you see a news headline, I've been a victim. I've been a victim. That's why I support a lot of these programs. I was quoted as having said that the Nigerian economy depends on Nape. And my name was just there. I was wondering when I might have said the economy of Nigeria, I say, oh, depends on Nape. So I'm very excited about today's program, and I strongly believe that at the end of an educating program like this, which has cost us so much to put together, journalists reporting the energy issues will be able to do better. We are going to sustain this. We continue to run this program on an annual basis as Nape. It's not very common within professional bodies, putting journalists together to help them to report events around what different professional bodies do. It's one of our corporate social responsible program. We continue to run it on an annual basis. We thank our members who are not even journalists, but made time to be a part of this. I cited so many ESCO members that have joined us in this program. I want to appreciate especially our staff at the Secretariat who try to navigate challenges associated with those joining and in putting this event together. Time will not permit me. I appreciate each and every one that has been a part of the success of today's program. We as Nape will continue to sustain programs of this nature until we get to the November conference, which is going to be the first virtual international conference. It's going to be exciting. I want to encourage each and every one to make time to be a part of that event. You may not get to see such a virtual conference after our conference in November. It's going to be very exciting. Continue to keep in touch. We are there. We have people stand by 24/7 to attend to questions that will arise with respect to the conference. Thank you very much. We appreciate you. Have a blessed day and a memorable week ahead. God bless.